So welcome everybody to this plática on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It is a plática that we should have ongoing to remind our gente of the occurrences that happened 173 years ago, in which U.S. imperialism had attacked Mexico and stolen 2.5 million kilometers of Mexican territory and at gunpoint. So we will discuss this. The theme is towards a revolutionary perspective and action on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And we will be discussing why on this day, what is the treaty? And I want to introduce, before we continue, I want to introduce compañero Tlacayautzin, compañero Guillermo Suárez, who is from the Movimiento de Liberación Nacional, compañero Ernesto Ayala from the Raza Unida Party, and he also participates with, what is his name again?
Telejaguar.
What is it?
Telejaguar.
Telejaguar. And also we have with us compañero Benjamin Prado, who is the subsecretary of General Secretary of the Unión del Barrio, which is a liberation organization, and myself, Citlalmina, and I work with Unión, Barrio Defense Committee, and president of the Centro Atzlan Chicomostoc at this time. So we will begin with this discussion of, we would like compañero Benjamin Prado to begin. What gave rise to the treaty? What were the social political conditions in both Mexico and the US imperialists at that time? And this is going to be a materialist overview of what has happened at that time. So begin.
Bueno, muchas gracias, compañera Citlalmina, for organizing this discussion around the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. For Unión del Barrio, it's fundamentally important to understand the historical context in which the U.S. empire as a colonial settler nation expanded and subjected not only the Mexicano people, but now the world over, to a system of parasitic capitalism and settler colonial violence. And so for Unión del Barrio, this is a really timely discussion because, as we see with everything that's happening around us, the settler colonial state, whether it be in the form of the fascistic Trump administration or even the fascistic Biden administration, the character of this political moment really necessitates us to reflect on the serious nature and character of our struggle. And Unión del Barrio, since 1981, has identified that settler colonialism is a primary contradiction that is subjecting our people to the worst type of exploitation, both our labor, our natural resources, and as well as our material wealth that is being stolen, right? And so Unión del Barrio, when it was founded in 1981, really identified that question of settler colonialism as primary contradiction, recognizing that our struggle was for land, right? Upholding the historic struggles of our peoples as Mexicanos, Mexicanas, Chicanos, Chicanas, to be able to build our capacity to organize, to build our power and reclaim the land, to reclaim our labor, and to reclaim the stolen wealth that is being extracted from our peoples. So to understand the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo within its historical context, we have to understand, that the United States was born as a settler nation, a European settler colony, and that its primary goal has always been to expand, as it articulated itself through the everything from manifest destiny, the ideological underpinning that it created this drive to expand slavery primarily as its form of economic production and economic mode of production, which required the enslavement of African people, which required the genocide of indigenous nations, that required a whole massive superstructure known as the settler colonial state in the form of the army, to be able to then expand, to land grab, to rip off the natural resources and wealth of indigenous peoples. And we see that that its economic mode of production of capitalism required, as has already been laid out in historical documents, and even with our relationship with the African People's Socialist Party, who clearly state that that capitalism could not exist without the uh, the capturing and enslavement of African people brought to the United States. And one of the reasons why is because indigenous people resisted. They resisted the colonial occupation. They resisted the colonies. Uh, uh, and as a product, and because they knew the geographic terrain, basically we were displaced, our indigenous peoples were displaced into different territories, right? So, by 18, we look at before or 1791, when this nation state was constituted with its constitutions and its Bill of Rights, obviously applying only to white people, uh, white males with property, meaning slaves and land. Uh, with this empire created uh, and produced was a settler nation that has as its foundation slavery and genocide, right? And so it can only reproduce itself and its existence through that policy of slavery and genocide. As we saw Mexico during the late 1790s at that moment was going through intense uh, conflict with even the Spanish colonial crown, right? The colonizer crown between the Gauchupines but primarily the rise. What we saw is the rise of indigenous peoples resisting slavery, resisting colonialism, uh, especially in certain areas where even Spanish colonialism was not able to effectively conquer or control territory. And this is where we saw the rise of indigenous peoples who organized rebellions all over Mexico. Um, the hotbed of rebellion taking place in the southern states, in Michoacan area, Guerrero. We saw this uprising, well, what is now known as Guerrero, and we saw this uprising of in 1810 with the then uh, creation of rebel armies that eventually became the independence armies. And it's, we understand that you could not have a independence movement and struggle without the indigenous and African peoples of Mexico who rose up in rebellion to all forms of colonial exploitation and slavery. And that it was this sector, this most progressive sector, this most not progressive, but revolutionary elements of that time period of 1810 that actually launched the struggle for independence. Uh, Even though some landowning settler colonial elites financed much of it because they didn't want to pay their taxes or whatever to the Spanish crown, but it was led primarily by indigenous and African peoples. And so we saw by 1813 el Congreso de Anáhuac in Chilpancingo, Guerrero, led by José María Morelos y Pavón, create the Sentimientos de la Nación, really looking at the question of land and an end to slavery. Obviously, he was killed in battle, Vicente Guerrero, the African indigenous liberator of Mexico by 1829. Then it was the one who actually implemented the, the important gains of independence and abolished slavery. And that really pissed off a lot of the landowning elite that was left over in Mexico. And so we saw even a lot of this colluding even with the United States, because the reason why there was a war, the reason why there was a struggle and contention for Texas in particular, was precisely the question of slavery. The Mexicanos, as it was laid out in the struggle to end slavery, did not allow slavery to exist on its national territory, which by then included obviously Texas, Colorado, Arizona, Nuevo Mexico, or what is currently known, right? California and Nevada, and all this territory. It was the land slave owners of the South that wanted to expand this system and mode of production. And it was precisely the Mexican indigenous peoples, African peoples, who resisted and fought tooth and nail to ensure that that didn't happen. By 1836, the so-called Alamo was that struggle and contention around land, that because Mexico demanded that all those slave owners free the slaves in that territory as they were settling the northern part of Mexico. And that is the foundation upon which this struggle came down, right? And the invasion of the United States through its ideological doctrine of manifest destiny, the invasion of Mexico because of the levels of warfare that it had advanced. The United States was militarily much more advanced in terms of its methods of warfare and its relentless, sick methods of complete genocide of entire pueblos. But the people did resist. The indigenous people did resist and fight back. You know, we saw a lot of rebellions that took place. And this is not to say that, you know, everybody in the northern part of Mexico had that national consciousness per se, but they knew that their struggle was against the gringos invading their lands and being displaced and dispossessed as indigenous nations. And so, you know, it's important to understand, at least for us, to be clear that our struggle as Mexicanos is rooted in an anti-colonial struggle. It is rooted in an anti-imperialist struggle. That it is the foundation upon which even our own identity as Mexicanos, Mexicanas is based on. Because we can't talk about a Mexican nation without talking about the rebellions, the organized, the uprisings of the slave against the slave master, the oppressed against the oppressor, right? The colonized against the colonizer. And so for us, it's fundamentally important to see ourselves and situate ourselves within that anti-colonial struggle. Obviously, the struggles and contentions between what is in any type of revolution and any type of struggle for independence, you have different factions, right? And one faction, the petty bourgeoisie, those that want to maintain the system as it exists, also fought to keep their slaves, right? And so we see that as the very act of invading, the very act of warfare is by its very nature an illegal act. It is an act of illegality and aggression against other peoples. And so, you know, when we talk about the United States as the U.S. empire, it's Marine him, right? Those that invaded us, you know, talk about the Hozo Moctezuma, right? In reference to invading our lands as an act of conquest. And so our condition as a people is tied up to a condition of national oppression. And so in order for us to be free, we have to fight back against that settler colonial state that subjected our people now and converted us essentially as foreigners on our own land, utilizing this terrible treaty known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which, by the way, was signed by the most reactionary, the most right-wing, the most conservative elements of the Mexicano petty bourgeoisie, right? We're talking about individuals like Bernardo Cauta, Miguel Ariastan, or Luis Cuevas, right? These were the right-wing, most conservative elements of and opportunists actually who took over is the Mexican state, because those that were fighting back in the form of Vicente Guerrero, or even when we're talking about Jose Maria Morelos y Pavon, they were traitorously killed and assassinated precisely because they went against the interest of that landed bourgeoisie, right? And so what we have now is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is an agreement amongst the elite, and those of the oppressed, those of the oppressed class must challenge any legitimacy that these individuals of the oppressor class have over us as a nation. And the reality is that the treaty has never been respected. Just like all the other treaties that the United States signed with indigenous peoples was never respected. If not, if they did, and they don't even recognize it, right? And so we should not either, right? But it's an important historical document that we can reference that highlights the character of this attack against our people, right? Primarily looking at that there were three fundamental elements that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo laid out. Number one, open borders, that there would be, that the ability of the indigenous peoples to move from place to place would not be hindered. Number two, that there would be respect for land and water rights. And number three, that there would be respect for language and culture. And the reality is that all that has been violated as a system of colonial oppression, codified even in law, even to the point where today we as Mexicanos are considered foreigners on our own land, and every day are persecuted by these armies of migra and police terror in our barrios as a form of a foreign invading army that continue to hold us in capture in detention centers, in concentration camps, and in these massive concentration camps, even known as reservations, right? So, yeah, not to take up too much more time, but that's the essence of how we see this question of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo as an illegitimate treaty that supposedly ended a war, but it didn't end a war. It only codified the conditions of settler colonialism and settler laws on our peoples, and that we have an absolute right to overturn that system and cultural violence that has attacked us, primarily the system of capitalism, settler colonialism, and US imperialism as the primary enemies of our people. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, compañero Benjamin. One thing that I wanted to say is that that the U.S. imperialist went all the way down to Mexico City. They wanted to take over all of Mexico, but they turned back because they didn't want to. They didn't want to have the indigenous people as part of their, government. So that they settled for the border up north. So that's one of the things that I wanted to say. The other thing that I wanted to say is that many people say that there was this contract was signed between two nations. Well, the fact of the matter is that it was unilaterally signed because at that time the U.S. imperialist Senate had taken off 3 articles that had to do with the right for us to speak our own language, to conduct our own culture, our traditions, and walk freely, but most of all to maintain our own property. So those 3 of those articles, 8, 9, and 10, were taken off unilaterally by this U.S. imperialist government. So it is that precisely why It should not be recognized, and it is totally invalid. Well, we will continue with compañero Guillermo Tlacayautzin.
Buenas noches a todos los que nos están escuchando, los que están participando con nosotros. I want to recognize Ernesto and Benjamin and yourself, Lamina. Thank you for this program and your participation tonight. Let me start. I'm a member of the Movimiento Liberación Nacional, a nationalist organization, a revolutionary nationalist organization who advocates for the socialist reunification of our homeland. And I know that that sometimes raises a contradiction with the Partido and other forces, but we'll talk about that today, hopefully, and ongoing as the Movimiento continues to struggle and we continue to seek unity of the organizations of our people that are struggling to move forward and to participate in the creation of a new world. Let me pick up where compañero Prado, Benjamin, sort of left it off. See, we think that the treaty itself is illegal from the jump, and that has political consequences. But let me say why we think that it's illegal. If you remember, or maybe not, but the treaty is actually called El Tratado de Paz, Amistad y Límites. Now, as Benjamin said, the U.S. has not honored that treaty in any way. Lamina, you correctly pointed out that they deleted several of the articles that had been agreed to by the Mexican negotiators. Now, in terms of that, we need to point out that up to the signing of the treaty on February the 2nd in 1848, the United States military had invaded our homeland, and we called all of Mexico our homeland. The United States military had invaded the regional capitals of Santa Fe, of San Jose, California, and it had also invaded Veracruz, and it invaded Mexico City. And that's why the history of Los Niños Héroes de Chapultepec, if you check it out, you find out that they were resisting the US Army planting its flag in Chapultepec. Now, on behalf of the Mexican negotiators, the treaty was signed, but not by, many of us think, by Santana, who was president at the time, but in fact, he had been ousted, and the person who signed the treaty was the vice president at the time. And I forget the person's name at this moment, but the vice president did not have the authority. I think he was actually like the leader of the Supreme Court, and he stepped into being the vice president. That in itself would make the treaty illegal because it was not signed by the Mexican president or the Mexican negotiators with the appropriate governmental authority. The other thing is we've been uncovering documents and information which show that the treaty, even in its opening sentences, admits to the United States having invaded Mexico. Now, how can one country technically sign a peace treaty when the other side admits that it had invaded its land? We have to remember that at that time, Santa Fe, San Jose, California were occupied. The Veracruz was still being occupied by the military forces of the United States. So clearly, it wasn't an equal of parties or, hands off, hands distance kind of negotiations to settle the war. And as Benjamin was pointing out, at the time of actually, we would go back to 1836, which is when the United States settlers, well, maybe the settler colonialists, we should point them out first. They're the ones who started the division of Mexico. The settler colonialists came in, agreeing to abide by Mexican national laws, even adopted the Christian religion, the Catholic religion, I'm sorry, I should say. And they came in to the northern section of Texas, Coahuila, and then they broke it off. Then they declared themselves a republic, and they broke off from the Mexican state of Texas, Coahuila, and became their own independent nation, the Republic of Texas. And then they petitioned to join in the United States, to become a part of the United States. This then gave Mexico, said, no, wait a minute, that's not part of what happened. We don't recognize the borders, etc. And then the United States manufactured an incident along the Rio Grande to justify the subsequent invasion of the rest of Mexico. Just as they did in Cuba when they blew up their own ship, the Maine, which then allowed them to invade Cuba and Puerto Rico and other countries of Latin America. We see that the United States has always created these incidents to follow up with the war. So we see that the treaty, we believe that the treaty is illegal, and that we should, as a movement, as individuals, we should say that the treaty is null and void, meaning that it has no meaning, that it's not legitimate. We don't have to abide by it. Now that has serious consequences, because then that puts us to legitimately claim that we live in occupied territories. Because if the treaty is not valid, then we're still at war with the United States. And it's been indicated or alluded to, the police kill us every day. The immigration authorities, they separate us, they divide the country, they deport us, etc. So there's really no peace, if you look at it in the bigger picture, between the United States, between the settler armies, the police, the immigration authorities, the Texas Rangers, the California Rangers. All of these individuals and organizations served white supremacy, settler colonialism, to oppress, to keep our people down and to take over the land. Part of taking over our land, was that, I'm sorry, I'm moving in the wrong direction, I'm trying to not have that light show up in the back, is they took gold, silver, iron, not to mention the oil and gas from what is now the state of Texas. All of these natural resources could have been used by the Mexicano people, by the Mexicano nation, to further develop our country, further develop our economic system, and to further develop our society. But what has happened is that the southern half of our country has become a dependent capitalist state on the United States. And we could see that in different ways with the treaty, as our compañero Pablo Aceves used to say, the free slave treaty, the new slave agreement that came into effect in 1994. We can see it with the new treaty between Mexico, Canada, and the United States, where the economies of the United States, it still dominates over the economy of Mexico. And so we think that we need to carry forward the national liberation struggle. And another point, which I'm sure that this is where our compañero Ernesto is going to address, is that the treaty, after the division of our homeland, sacking of our natural resources, many people were left in the occupied territories. I forget the exact number, but there was thousands of Mexicanos that were still left in the occupied territories. And so, part of what the movement has argued for the last, 30, 40 years has been that this treaty created a new nation, created a new nationality, created the nationality of which some of us call Chicanos, and created a nation of Aztlán. Now, we politically disagree with those terms, but we agree we got to struggle for social justice. We got to struggle to eliminate capitalism and to eliminate imperialism. But those are some of the bigger consequences that developed as a result of the division of our homeland. I mean, the other part of it is that some of us have internalized a mental border where it's like, no, we're over here, we're different than those Mexicans who live south of the border. When in reality, we are one people that has been divided militarily, and that the United States has imposed a militarized zona frontera across half of our homeland. And it's time for the movement and for us as individuals to move our struggle forward to not just be settled for like civil and democratic rights, even though we got to continue that struggle, but we have to move the struggle to the level of arguing for our human rights as a divided nation, our human rights as a people that have been divided, our human rights as a people that are struggling for our national liberation. And so I will leave it there and open it up for our compañero Ernesto. But Citlamina, you want to pick up and say anything?
Yeah, I wanted to identify also the fact that throughout the struggle of our people, that we have been confronted with people that have been reactionary all along. Ever since the Spanish invaders came into our land and colonized us and enslaved us, and then we fought for our independence. There were forces that would align with the enemy, and those forces continue to be with us. Continue to be, they could be called compradores or sellouts or whatever, but to me that's really important because we can identify them today. And many times they will not, they will follow the politics of the U.S. imperialist government, and by claiming that we're not even Mexicanos, because they know that our forces are very strong within occupied territory. So it's really important for us to identify those forces that align themselves with these enemy, imperialist governments. So that's something that I wanted to stress, not only within occupied territory, but also in Mexico, and where they're struggling with those same forces that are attacking something that's growing in Mexico. So, compañero Ernesto, go for it.
Yeah, compañeros, gracias. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank you all, the Barrio Defense Committee, Movimiento de Liberación Nacional, and Unión. All organizations from our people that I have great respect for, ¿verdad? And I'm honored to be here, ¿verdad? And I'm honored to be on the panel, ¿verdad? Compañera Citlamina. It's been a long time since I've seen you, compañera. I have a lot of fond memories when I was younger, seeing you. But anyways, it's great to see you. I'm a member of the Partido, la Raza, Unida. And just the position that we take, is that this invasion did create a new nation.
Benjamin.
Should I pause? Or? Okay. Okay.
Go ahead, brother, go ahead.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
And that is our position. It doesn't mean we're not open to unity, ¿verdad? And that we don't see ourselves as a part of a broader, obviously, anti-colonial, Raza, indigenous struggle, ¿verdad? Anti-imperialist struggle. We do, obviously, we do. I wanna bring up a good point. I think compañero Benjamin brought up, ¿verdad? About how when the United States invaded this part, what was in northern Mexico, ¿verdad? What we call Aslan, ¿verdad? They signed their death warrant. Really, it's taken a little while longer than we expected, but I think they did. And I think, that's something I think that it is key to talk about in reference to the treaty and the U.S. invasion, ¿verdad, of our lands, because it's something that they can't deny. But we are the people, whether we want to call ourselves Chicanos, Mexicanos, or Mexicanos. We are the only group of people, and I say this with respect to our other sisters and brothers from other colonized nations, but we are the largest group of people that have a claim to the land within the empire, and we're a group of people that have been growing tremendously, over even more so than we were in the 1960s and 70s. There's more Raza today in the occupied territories than ever before. And we're mainly a working class people. We are working class people, ¿verdad? And like, you know, everything, you know, just reiterating everything the compañeros have said, you know, our land and labor have helped build up this empire, you know, and it rests upon us. You know, a large portion of it rests upon us, and a large portion of it, you know, of its stability rests upon us being disunited and having the majority of our raza not know their history and not know that they have a struggle that is legitimate to them, you know. You know, I always found it interesting how, for example, you know, just an example here in the Central Valley of California, you know, that part of land, just the stolen territory, just that part of land itself is the 15th largest economy in the whole world. And who does all that labor? La raza, you know, Mexicanos, you know, we're the ones that create all that wealth, you know, on land that was stolen from us. And a lot of, you know, and, you know, we all know this, you know, a lot of that raza that does that work is undocumented. And the only reason they're undocumented is because of this war, this invasion. You know, so you know, and so I think that's something we need to recognize, you know, and it's you know, a lot of times, you know, in this, obviously in this society, in, you know, settler colonial society, you know, they erase all struggles, you know, but I think they take an extra how do you say, an extra, they try to do it with a, you know, a little more with us, you know, because I think they know that there's a natural there's a natural sense of belonging here amongst the raza, you know, again, whatever we call ourselves, Chicanos or Mexicanos, or I call myself a Chicano Mexicano, you know, because I think, you know, that is something that you know, we don't deny, you know, that Mexicanidad and being Mexicano is totally a part of who we are, you know, and it's totally a part of what these lands are, ¿verdad? That's a part of the history. We can't deny that. You know, the only reason places are called California, Texas, is because, you know, it was part of Mexico. Obviously, it was a part of Spain, but we kicked out Spain. You know, we kicked out Spain. And that's also another point I think is important, that a lot of people forget, you know, the context of what we're talking about, that the Southwest, Northern Mexico, Aztlán, you know, whatever we call it, has a long history that is completely, you know, separate from what the rest of the United States is. You know, this land right here, our people have always, I mean, we've been in the whole continent, but in this part of the world, we have a distinct history that is in more aligned with the rest of Mexico and you know, what is called, quote unquote, Latino America, you know, a history of resistance that we expelled Spain already once. You know, the United States is just another foreign occupier that we need to, you know, build up our forces, build up our organization to eventually expel them as well. You know, and I think, you know, when we understand that, you know, when we understand, you know, again, también reiterating everything the compañeros have said, you know, that treaty, you know, it doesn't define us. That treaty is illegal, completely illegal. And we don't view with any legitimacy. I mean, it is, you know, like compañero said, a historical document, you know, and we could use it for reference and to show the blatant hypocrisy of the United States and in their relationship to Raza. You know, again, that document, that treaty, you know, to supposedly end the war. Again, you know, también, again, you know, that war never ended. The war has continued, and we can see it. But that treaty, you know, it shows the complete hypocrisy. You know, on the one hand, you know, they need our labor. They need our labor. All the major cities in the Southwest have been built up by Chicano Mexicano labor. You know, on the other hand, you know, they depict us as some sort of, you know, parasite, you know, to their population, to mobilize their population. You know, they depict us as some sort of invasionary parasites that you know, that's what they are. You know, so you know that treaty, you know, it guaranteed us, you know, supposedly guaranteed us certain rights that have never been respected. You know, for example, my family has been here since probably that time, and they lost land, you know, and they had a whole bunch of land, but they lost land, you know, and they were kicked out during the Depression because they were Mexicanos. And it didn't matter if they were from here or from wherever, they just kicked them out and they sent them to Mexico, you know, pero that treaty, you know, obviously it's a good reference point, you know, it's a good historical document to refer to, but it's completely illegitimate. And like all the other treaties that they've signed with all the other nations, native nations that they've put under the boot of Yankee imperialism. They're illegitimate treaties. The land belongs to the people. The land belongs to indigenous people. It belongs to La Raza, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's who the land belongs to, and so we do uphold a struggle for national liberation, and I think when we recognize that, ¿verdad? Again, we recognize the similarities we have with the rest of the world and the rest of our compañeras and compañeros, from the African nations or from other tribal nations, or Boricuas, and their heroic struggle, because we identify with them because we have more in common because of this history of broken treaties and genocide and land occupation and all these things that have happened to us, in order to exprimirnos of our labor and la tierra, that makes us have more in common with the rest of the world, with all these other nations that the United States has invaded and stolen from and caused horrendous crimes against humanity. Look at the Middle East, perfect example. Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these countries, we have more in common with the people there than these people that are occupying our land call themselves Americans. We have way more in common with them. And we just had our own little we called it Pláticas con el Pueblo del Partido. We just had it about an hour before. And we talked about this, and one of the things that always caught my mind, because I heard, other compañeros in the Partido, or just other older Chicanos that were involved back then, how the ones that went to Vietnam, how they started seeing this, and under very horrific conditions, but when they were flying over, the fields in Vietnam, and it would remind them of being, back home over here. It would remind them of their own familias, and they would say, these are brown, campesinos. I have more in common with these people than the ones that are telling me that that's our enemy. So, I think, we should be reminded of that on this day, how our struggle isn't just, being a national liberation struggle, it is part of the entire struggle of the world, to create a new society. And one of those main things we need to do that is expelling imperialism, in particular U.S. imperialism, which is the enemy of humanity. So that is our position in La Raza Unida, and I think it doesn't, it's not that much different from everybody else, and so I just wanted to say that, and I think it's important to recognize that on this day, the inherent anti-imperialist nature of our struggle, when we get as organized as we can be, and we will be, it'll be probably the most existential threat to the United States ever. Gracias.
Thank you, compañero. One thing that I wanted to say is that yes, we are at war, and they, the U.S. imperialist government does, exercise war against us because they know that we are a colonized people within our own land. So, and we see it every day, through the police killings, police brutality, the poverty level, the incarceration, the mass incarceration of our gente. Now we're seeing that the virus is attacking us, but the governments are not treating us so that we will not be killed by this virus. So we are at war, and we'll continue to be at war because they know who we are. The other thing that I wanted to say something else, but I think that there's a compañeros that's asking a question, and maybe one of you all can answer it. I'll read it out. It says, I keep hearing our people. What does that mean? As someone who is mestizo, parentheses, Spanish, indigenous, Aztec, in parentheses, ancestry. Why should I consider those, for example, those who might be German and indigenous mix, or even Black and indigenous? I feel like the only thing we really have in common is that we share a colonized history. So does someone want to take that on?
Yeah, historically, I mean, the way we see it is that, historically, the question is, there's a struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed, the colonizer and the colonized. Mestizo is an invention to try to confuse us as to who we are. And the reality is that we're indigenous people. There's no, to call somebody a mestizo is like calling them a mutt, And so for us, what we have to do is reaffirm our history, understand our history, and struggle as a people. And when we talk about a people, we're talking about those aspects that identify us as indigenous peoples, And the reality is that, because of the mass confusion that colonial education has imposed on our on Raza, on Mexicanos in particular, but indigenous people in general, we don't, that colonial education has caused tremendous confusion. And so that's why it's so important to build organization and institutions that are able to counter the history of colonial education. We need our own institutions, like the Centro Aztlán, they're in San Jose, like our Centro Aztlán that we're building, the Escuela Aztlán that we have, right? And the different other models that are happening in other parts, whether it be, in San Fernando Valley or wherever we may be. We have to build and understand our history as indigenous people and revindicate that historical struggle as indigenous people, because the only reason why we're speaking English, or even the only reason why we're speaking Spanish, is because we were colonized, and we have to kick the oppressor and the colonizer, off of our backs, and create a new culture, a culture that is able to revindicate the most positive aspects of our indigenismo and our indigenous past, and ensure that we have a continuation of political struggle that is able to capture our land, our resources, and our labor, so we don't have to depend on the colonizer. We don't have to depend on those schools. And that's what dual and contending power is. And so we need power so that we can then create a society and we agree, right? We agree with the planteamiento of a socialist nation. We need social, because for all intents and purposes, we lived in socialism, in some form of communalism before the European invaders, right? And so our objective has to be to get back to creating some equilibrium in this society, in our world around us, because capitalism is killing us. It's either, and Evo Morales said it best, at the UN, either we destroy capitalism or capitalism is going to kill us and destroy us, right? And so that's the world in which we're contending with, so we choose a side, and we choose the side of indigenous peoples.
Compañero Tlacayatzin, do you have any comments or statements?
Well, I agree pretty much con lo que estaba diciendo Benjamín, but I also think that we have to be clear, and we have to be conscious of what we're doing. We are, Mexicano, we are an indigenous people. Now, because of settler colonialism, because of imperialism, there are many colors to Mexicanidad. There are many colors to the people that we are, and we shouldn't say, well, this one's more Mexican than that one. It's like Mexicans, because we see it not just as a question of racial identity, but it's a question of national consciousness. It's a question of saying, yeah, this is Mexico, or this is Aztlán. These are occupied territories. Those of us that are here, that are willing to struggle to overthrow capitalism, to overthrow colonialism, and to overthrow white settler imperialism, white settler colonialism, somos iguales. We're in the same trench. We're in the same struggle together. Y como dijo Benjamín, I think that one of the things that we need to push or advance, if you will, is the question of solidarity and organization. Organization is what's going to be key. For instance, here in San Jose, or up here in the Northern California area in San Jose, the city of San Jose just recently removed or agreed to remove the statue to Thomas C. Fallon. You say, who's that? Well, he was an invader. He came in with Fremont and those boys. He was the first one to raise the US flag over the city of San Jose. Before the treaty had been signed, he raised the US flag. And so after a very brief but intense campaign by the Barrio Defense Committee in support of individuals in Hero Tent, you know, we had several demonstrations, there was a petition. The city agreed to remove him at this last meeting. I don't have all the details yet, but we're looking into it. But they agreed to move him, just as the city of San Jose agreed to remove, and actually did, remove the statue of Cristobal Colon that they had sitting in the city hall rotunda here in San Jose. Again, as a result of a campaign, organized campaign by the Barrio Defense Committee, we put pressure on the city and they removed that statute as well, which shows us that consistent, organized struggle will bring us victories. You know, but to go back, see, I don't know if I caught the whole sentence, but I think that the compañera raised a question about like, well, I'm closer to the indigenous roots than say a German person or someone, you know, like that, right? I don't know. I mean, it's like, what does it mean? I mean, like, okay, we could go back and say, well, which indigenous nation, right? Mexicas, the Aztecas, that's not all who we are. I mean, we looked farther south, you run into the Mayan folks. And I use that general category because there's like, you know, 7 different tribes, 7 different clans, several different nations of Mayan individuals. And if they said, well, and if you said, well, you guys aren't Aztecs, man, you're not Mexica, therefore you're not Mexican. They would say, yeah, we ain't Mexican, we're Mayan, but we're part of this Mexican nation and we're willing to struggle. We're continuing to struggle. And as Benjamin said, you know, quoting Evo Morales, the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional made the same sort of similar statement in their one of their declarations earlier this year on January 1st. They said, capitalism cannot be reformed. Capitalism is out to kill all of us. So we have to destroy capitalism in order for us, in order for humanity, in order for the earth, in order for the plants, the water, everything. If we don't stop capitalism, if we don't overthrow it, it's going to destroy the world. And then what are we leaving to the future generations, right? So we agree, we have to destroy capitalism and not get into like, well, this person has blue eyes. Maybe they ran into the French somewhere down the road and they're not Mexicans. I have primas who have, you know, like blue eyes, man. And in the area of Mexico where they're from, yeah, the French were there and the French, you know, raped our people. And so like some of us now look French. I mean, not French, but you know, they don't look like, they don't look red, brown. They don't look indigenous, but they still identify as Mexican. And I'm not going to say you ain't a Mexican. You're willing to struggle for humanity, for socialism. Órale, let's step in the struggle. I hope I didn't go off on the question.
No. You know, one thing that I want to reiterate is, you know, according to what we have been studying at the Centro Tzlan Chicomostoc, is that our people, you know, they exercise socialist values, socialism. They exercise it. There was collectivity, you know, where people shared with the crops or whatever, you know, other, you know, communities had or didn't have. So, we, you know, so it's something that we have been operating for a long, long time. It's nothing new, you know. So, you know, so people shouldn't be surprised. The thing about it is that this particular system is a very destructive system because it's individualistic and, you know, it's greed and it's, you know, it's only, you know, purpose is to make profit from human labor, from, you know, stealing the resources from people, not only here in occupied territory, but all over the world. That's what this system does and has been doing for the last 300, 400 years that has been in operation. So now we see that, you know, because people are struggling and organizing and taking their resources back and becoming independent, now we're seeing that the system is debilitating, and sooner than later, it will come down, because it all depends on the struggle of our people throughout the world. And this is the mission that we have, as human beings, to create a better world for our people.
Ernesto, do you have any comments on that question?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, also, it's not a question of genetics; it's a question of nation. And
That's right.
what we're fighting against, is the condition that's forced on our people, and that doesn't, depend on your genetics necessarily. It depends on I mean, some obviously looking brown or looking more indigenous or looking more güerito, that it is genetics, but that's not what we're fighting. We're fighting for, against this foreign occupation of our land that forces, our people into basically wage labor, and forces, thousands of our people into the prison industrial complex, or captures our people like if we were animals, and throws us into cages, whether there's a Democrat or a Republican. That's what we're fighting. We're not, fighting over who's more indigenous or whatever. Obviously within our people, because of internal colonialism, we do, sometimes discriminate each other, based on facial features or stuff like that, skin color y todo eso. But that's not the main contradiction. That's a result of the contradiction. So yeah, I mean, it's about that nation, and I always like to give this example, as growing up, I've seen all sorts of people that are not Chicano or Mexicano descent identify as Chicano Mexicano, because they grew up in the barrio and they grew up with the same condition. Even I had a very good friend that passed away a few years ago. He was a white guy, but he grew up here in Pacoima. He talked like all other Chicanos, and he married a Chicana, and they lived right here down the street. And he was a worker, and he was even part of one of the barrios around here, and he spoke to you like the way I'm speaking right now, the same accent and all that. But so to me, he was Raza, and so and he would, he would even help out with whatever local stuff we would be doing. And this was just like a regular working class, guy, and he happened to be an Anglo guy, but he grew up in the barrio, so it's not a question of genetics, and it's a question of that having exactly what compañero Tlacayautzin said, that national consciousness, what unites us, what we have more in common, that idea of mestizo. Yeah, the same, as compañero Benjamin said, we're not dogs, we're human beings, we can't, how can we refer to each other as some kind of mixed breed, of human? I mean, there's only really, I mean, not to sound kumbaya, but there is only one human race. How can you mix that? I mean, yeah, I mean, so it's not a question of genetics, basically, is my point. It's a question of national consciousness, exactly what Guillermo said.
One thing that I wanted to say also is that when the European invaders came to our land, they stopped us from creating, and we could see it. According to what we learned, is that our ancestors has built these beautiful cities and societies and philosophies that were that promoted self-care and protection, and those institutions still stand. Those creations still stand today. But when they came, they stopped us from creating. They came and they brought their system of destruction and repression, and we haven't been able to create on our own because they took away our power. they colonized us. And, all we've been doing is operating under their gun, whatever they, their laws are for them, not for us. When they promote their laws, it's because they promote them so to how to keep us, under their control. So that's why, our position has always been that we're political prisoners in our own land. And because, we have no power, they colonized us, and we have to break away from that so that we can create and develop and study and do the same thing that our ancestors did at one time. Compañero Benjamin, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, we agree. This whole question about, legality and illegality, right? I mean, the reality is that the colonizer imposed, a legal doctrine of enslavement, right? I mean, even today, right? The laws of this nation, of the settler colonial nation, is codified that it's okay to enslave people, right? Whether it be in the form of wage slavery, right, where our people have to work 2-3 jobs just to survive, and sometimes not even that, right? With this COVID situation, the unmasking of the colonial conditions of our community are exposed, right? Where we go out, we take care, we grow the food that feeds society. We build the roads, the houses that house, settler colonizers. We work for other people before we even work for ourselves. How we even take care of other people's kids before we take care of our own, right? And the colonial relationship could not be any clearer. So the issue for us, it is a question of power, right? Because this whole question of legality or illegality is an opinion. The only problem that we have is that the colonizer state has a lot of resources to put standing armies in our communities to tell us whether or not we can, cross a fence that they put up as a consequence of their invasion, war, and occupation. And so it's critical for us to build power, and the only way we can build power is organization. That's why we emphasize, liberation demands organization. We have to be organized, and we have to build, the organization is the essence of unity. And so, we're very glad to be having this conversation with comrades in struggle, right? Because we have to see the reality for what it is and our common enemies, so that we can build power, so that we don't have migra in our barrios, separating families, right? When a system, when a colonial state systematically attacks the nucleus of our society, which is a family, as a matter of state policy, it's an act of war. When you separate, children from their parents, is an act of war. When you build walls to send them out into the mountains and deserts, it's an act of war. When you put them in concentration camps, whether it be prisons or reservations, it's an act of war. When you deny basic hygiene during a pandemic, when people are in detention or even out, right? These outside of the colonial prison system, and you still deny people healthcare, it's an act of war, right? And all the elements of warfare exist, right? We have people captured, people in detention. There's economic warfare happening in the form of gentrification. And so all these conditions are rotten ripe for our people to get organized. The question is, why have they not joined political struggle? And the reason why is because the mass media and even many of these platforms, social media, have our people subjected to some of the worst type of neoliberal discourse. And it's the confusing aspect of saturating people with information that is junk, right? Doesn't provide us any type of guidance, any type of understanding of who we are and how society functions, but it functions off of lies. It functions to promote a society of consumerism, and it has absolutely no redeeming value whatsoever. And so our task is to build those alternatives, right? With a conversation or discussion like this. And I'm not sure if at some point we want to open it up for other people, that are in the attendees also, if they want to ask questions. I know that we said put it in the chat or put in the question, but if you want to raise your hand, plus I don't know if también se vale, si Lamina, just want to put it out there. But that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah. Compañero Tlacayatsin, can do you have any, statements or anything? I'm going to turn off the mute because there's a baby here that's, expressing herself.
No, I would agree with what Benjamin just said. If other people want to ask another question or join in this discussion, we should give them a little bit of time. Because we were only going to go till 7:30 or something, right? So we don't have much more time. But if there's anybody there that has a question or wants to, I don't know how you plug it in, but maybe they could participate.
There are two, so I can allow. Let me see. The first one that I saw come in was Ruben Arteaga. I'll go ahead and let you go ahead and speak.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I actually just recently typed a question in the Q&A, but I can't see it now.
Oh, I could read it if you'd like. It says it's an ethnic major. That there's only one race. Even if it was cultural anthropologist major, I would tell you the same thing. Racial classification started in the mid-20th century. That being said, why do you use the term raza? Talk about community, I agree, it's not always about people, same ethnicity. Sometimes it's those who share the same culture as well. What I'm understanding, you're talking about community, you're referring to nationality as well. So that was your question. Do you want to add anything to your question?
I was just curious because somewhere in the conversation, when Ernesto was answering the other question that someone posted, it kind of seemed when you use the word raza, it's another way of you referring to nationality, about what kind of brings us together aside from our colonial past. It's that we also share the same land and ground. So I guess my question was, since you also mentioned, the whole kumbaya, one race thing, as an ethnic studies, we're all the kumbaya people that are like, yeah, there is only one race, the human race, unless you want to go biblical, and then there's the angelic race and demonic race. But we as ethnic studies majors, as cultural anthropologist majors, we view things from a different angle. So when you use the word raza, for us, we feel like you're talking more about nationality. So I guess my question is that what brings us together as a community, is that we essentially claim the same land?
Gracias, Ruben. Anybody want
to? Yeah, I mean, sorry. Yeah, compa Ruben, yeah, when we use the term raza, I mean, again, these are, we use the words that our own people, have developed. The term, la raza is something that, people use in common. It's a term of endearment that we've developed on our own. We hear people in the community, maybe our own parents or other people say, ¿Cómo está tu raza? And they don't mean, your race, but they do mean like your family, your community, your people. So yeah, when we use the term raza, it is like this all encompassing term, that means all of us, whether we call ourselves Chicanos or Mexicanos or even, Central American raza, because, that's raza, and they're here, or even if they're over, in their country, we're all raza. So we all have this common identity. Yeah, it does allude to a national consciousness, and even a more broader national, in my opinion, a more broader national consciousness. I don't know if someone else wants to answer.
Yeah, I know that we as Unión del Barrio, we use raza as a historical term that brought together people, and we basically, in essence, use it as the people, el pueblo, right? La raza. And it came out mainly from the struggles of the Chicano power movement, right? To refer to basically working class community, right? And yeah, it has that connotation of you know, Raza Mexicanos, you know, people, the people, right? But we typically prefer, you know, Mexicanos, right? We typically prefer to refer to people, even in their own nationality, as Nicaraguenses, Chilenos, Guatemaltecos, right? In recognition of of our historic struggles for building a nation that is not a settler colonial nation, right? It has a progressive liberatory connotation versus one of oppressor or even of race, even though it literally means you know, race, but it's historic cultural aspect born from struggle, right? It has a liberatory connotation to it, so it's a political term more than anything, right? That's how we understand it. I know there was another one, Adrian Vargas. I'm not sure if let's Gayotzin, he wanted to say something, or even Lamina before we recognize Adrian.
Yeah, one of the things that you know, that from my experience is that, you know, within the struggle of our people, we you know, developed certain language, okay, but it was within the struggle of our people, such as the Chicano movement, where we use that you know, terms like raza, you know, and other terms, you know, because the conditions of our people on this side of occupied territory, it seems like they're different from the other side of the northern, you know, the northern part of our land, you know, where we have to you know, struggle with the occupying forces, and so our language changes, but we're the same people, you know. We're still battling it out, but you know, we changed the language, you know, like calo, you know, different kinds of language that we use in occupied territory, but we mean our people. Compañero Tlacayautzin?
No, let's see what the question is from Adrian, if he has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, adelante.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Gracias. Sí, este es para cualquiera de los presentes, los tres, contestar. It's a two-part question. First of all, se ha predicado or estimated by census counts and economic reports that by 2025, la gente chicana, mexicana, latina va a ser the leading force and consumer trends, fashion, design for youth, all kinds of gadgets and, bueno, podríamos decir cochinaditas, para que la gente se haga más consumidora dentro de nuestro propio pueblo, y mientras nos están todavía esclavizando, ahora vamos a esclavizarnos como consumidores. Ese es un panorama general que no la estoy inventando, sino que ya se está proyectando, y esa influencia de consumir y el trend, porque vamos a ser la mayoría, dentro de la mayoría de chicanos y mexicanos, va a ser la influencia por todo el mundo. Igual que está sucediendo, y lo hemos visto con la cultura de los hermanos afroamericanos. Esa es una situación que vamos a tener, ¿ok? Si la queramos o no. Y otra pregunta relacionada con eso es, no para poder inventar el futuro, pero por los medios de los trends, podríamos decir, que se sienten, que se ven, que no se pueden negar. ¿A qué nivel de combativo vamos a estar algunos de nosotros que todavía estamos aquí y algunos que no están, pero que sigue otra ola de gente conciencia que pueda seguir la lucha de una forma u otra? Porque tenemos que recordar que un movimiento para luchar por las tierras es un proceso como lo fue la primera revolución social de la Revolución Mexicana. Es un proceso de no ir a que el alcalde y el concilio decidan tinten la estatua porque ofende. Va a ser sangriento y no sé si vamos todavía a seguir consumidores y hacer lo que sucede de aquí a 5 años en el campo del batallón, en el campo del movimiento. Ya vamos a tener una ideología más refinada o digamos, una organización más organizada. ¿Cómo vamos a establecer lo que estamos hablando? Y todo el mundo ya está tirando por todos lados la cuestión del socialismo. Bueno, nos pone en posición a nosotros y a mí como elder y todavía activista del movimiento, de no jugar con la verdad y poder compartir a los niveles más complicados como lo que está pasando en este diálogo de hoy. Porque si es cuestión de que la gente, nuestra gente, como decimos, que aclarar, no se da cuenta de su potencia, de su potencial, ¿cómo vamos a resultar cuando la potencia de el Pentagón, digamos, el Pentagón militar estadounidense? Ya vimos las Fuerzas Armadas que estuvieron listas para la inauguración del presidente. O sea, tenemos que ser verdaderos y honestos a definir mucho antes que ocurra qué es nuestra meta y cómo se sirve o se define nuestros principios, porque sí aún está un movimiento a nivel global. I hope I didn't lose the connection between the two factors, pero esas son realidades. La que más me preocupa es la que no conozco también, que qué va a ser el cambio social político de aquí a 5 años en Estados Unidos, principalmente. Y esa es la pregunta.
Muchas gracias, Adrián.
Compañero, you want to answer that? Benjamin?
I'll let other
Okay.
brothers, comrades, you know.
La Callao,
go ahead and-
I'll give it a shot. You know, I think that lo que pasa, bueno, no lo que pasa. Tienes razón. Nuestra población va incrementando. Our population is growing, and consumerism is an enemy. It's something that we will have to address, that we have addressed. I remember, I think it was in the 1980s, que no, Ernesto, when the Partido launched a campaign against the so-called decade of the Hispanic, you know, because they try to eliminate our consciousness, they try to eliminate who we are, you know, our understanding. Similarly, we have to start now in projecting solidarity, por decirlo así. We need to start projecting anti-consumerism, right? To not let the state buy us, and to not let the state or this economic system buy us out. And that's a problem. That's you know, that active or conscious people have been trying to address since we became conscious active elements, you know? And the thing is that, yes, consumerism is going to be buy this, buy that, buy that. And we have to say, no, we don't need, you know, another SUV. We don't need this or that. What we need is food for all. What we need is, lo que mencionaba Benjamin, is we need medicine, medical care for every human being. What we need are just wages for the labor that we do. And we need to like combat that on an ideological level, if you will, because we can't let them win that struggle, because you're right. I mean, for instance, let's just imagine that we become the sole population, right? The raza, the gente, the Mexicanos, the Chicano Mexicanos. We become the dominant population in the United States. Pero si todos somos capitalistas y si todos somos consumerists, ¿qué ha cambiado? ¿Qué va a cambiar? Nada. And so maybe it goes to the idea that Benjamin alluded to, you know, the idea of we need to start building dual power so that we have institutions, community institutions such as centros that provide a different outlook for life, that provide a different outlook as to what it means to be a true human being. And, you know, it may sound funny that I say true human being, pero de eso se trata, is to like break off the shackles of capitalism, of imperialism, and to develop truly who we are as human beings to the fullest extent that we can, you know? And so, yeah, we have to combat that constantly, because it's constantly there every day. Well, you turn on the radio, you turn on the TV, you turn on the social networks, it's buy this, compra esto, look at this, look at that, you know? And so you gotta, you know, it's like if we're not conscious, you could get swept up into it and buy the latest, you know, automatic toothbrush or whatever, man, you know, but we don't need that. And as to the path, well, that's probably going to be part of ongoing discussions between not just the three organizations represented here, but by the community, by the people themselves, as to whether or not, you know, how we're going to continue to move forward, because we're going to continue to move forward. Those of us that search for the new world, we have to continue, and this will continue. I mean, we're here, you know, like what, 500 years later, when the Españoles first got to Tenochtitlan, you know, they didn't eliminate us. They may have killed a few leaders and stuff, but the gente, the raza, the semillas, we're here. The roots are still here. I mean, you know, we may look a lot different, but hey, we're still here as a people, as humans. And I think, I mean, like, it's kind of well, maybe it's too broad of a question to answer like in 5 minutes or something, but I'll leave it there in case Benjamin or Ernesto wants to like contribute a thought or two on this.
Yeah, well, you know, I think again, you know, what everybody has said, I think that's por eso es la importancia de ser parte de una organización, ¿verdad? Porque solo así podemos crear esa nueva conciencia, you know, por creando las instituciones y todo eso que crea una sociedad, y no solo que tenga, la razón que esto es un concernimiento, el consumismo, es porque eso es lo que la hegemonía capitalista nos empuja día por día, desde el día que nacemos hasta el día que no estamos, ¿verdad? Nos está diciendo, tienes que comprar, tienes que usar esto, tienes que usar la nueva, ahora con los teléfonos, necesitas el nuevo teléfono cada año o cada 6 meses, y tienes que bajar la nueva aplicación y estar en Instagram y Facebook y todo esto. Hasta ahora hay aplicaciones que yo ni sé cómo se manejan. Y le pregunto a mi hija, ¿verdad? Y ella es la que se hace esto y lo otro, ¿verdad? Pero nos tienen en ese mundo así constantemente, tienes que tener eso, tienes que tener lo otro. Pero es porque eso le sirve al capitalismo, ¿verdad? De que nos exprima de cualquier manera, cómo nos pueda sacar, si no trabajo, lo poco dinero que ganamos del trabajo, ¿verdad? Y hasta el dinero que no tenemos, por eso es el crédito, you know? Pero por eso necesitamos estar organizados, ¿verdad? Ser parte de Unión del Barrio, del Movimiento de Liberación Nacional, del Barrio Defense Committee, de la Raza Unida, porque así creamos esa nueva sociedad, porque eso es cuando tenemos el poder. Y si tenemos poder, podemos organizar instituciones, escuelas, medios de comunicación, ¿verdad? Una nueva cultura, ¿verdad? O como hizo un buen punto la compañera Silamina, ¿verdad? De que nosotros ahorita, a este momento, estamos viviendo bajo la sociedad de otra gente, ¿verdad? O sea, nosotros como raza, chicanos, mexicanos, ¿verdad? Gente de origen indígena, no estamos viviendo nuestra realidad, estamos viviendo la realidad de alguien más. Y ellos nos dicen, estos son ¿cómo se dice?
Las reglas, las leyes.
Las reglas, las leyes, cómo debe ser un humano, debe ser así. Y nosotros, en la manera que hemos vivido y la manera humana, natural, no es eso, ¿verdad? Entonces, por eso necesitamos estar organizados para crear ese poder y poder crear estas instituciones que le pongan frente a todo eso, ¿verdad? Y que necesitamos tener, ¿verdad? Programas como ¿verdad? Necesitamos tener escuelas, necesitamos tener, como dije, ¿verdad? Los medios de comunicación y eventualmente tener más cosas, centros, ¿verdad? Tener nuestra propia fuerza policíaca, pero nuestra, del pueblo, ¿verdad? Tener todo tipo de lo que existe en una sociedad, ¿verdad? Que corre un gobierno, nosotros lo tenemos que tener, pero eso solo puede pasar cuando nos organicemos, ¿verdad? Entonces yo creo que eso es lo que tenemos que llevar en mente, ¿verdad? Que podemos hablar muchas cosas, ¿verdad? Y teorizar y todo eso, y eso está bueno, está perfecto, pero tenemos que estar organizados, tenemos que estar organizados.
You know, one thing that I wanted to say is that we will continue this struggle. Whether we're here, somebody else is going to take the torch. And the reason why I'm telling you is because our people gave us that example. They, when they traveled from the north to the south, they were looking for a certain sacred place, and it took them 13 generations. They focused. They just focused until they got to that point where they found the location, the universal location that they called Tenochtitlan. But it took them that many generations. So, the struggle will continue. The DNA, look, we're, the majority of our people, the majority of our gente are mostly situated in occupied territory. That, it's in our DNA that we will take our stolen land back, because it's in our DNA. So, I want to tell you that, we can't be demoralized. We have to move forward, struggle forward.
Muchas gracias, Silamina. And ya estamos, we're already at time, 7:35, right? Pero sí quería nomás tocar dos puntos muy importantes para Adrián. En primer lugar, esta cuestión de que no somos, bueno, numéricamente somos la mayoría. Eso ya definitivamente está comprobado. El problema es de que no tenemos la conciencia política de poder efectuar lo que es el poder, sino lo que pasa es de que los partidos políticos capitalistas, sean demócratas, sean republicanos, que oportunísticamente utilizan, por un lado, nos atacan, nos criminalizan, nos someten a el peor tipo de explotación y sometimiento. Y en realidad lo que no tenemos es ese poder de señalarlos una vez por todas, porque es el Partido Demócrata que nos invadió. Es el Partido Demócrata de la esclavitud. Es el Partido Demócrata que promovió el destino manifiesto. Es el Partido Demócrata que construyó estos muros. Es el Partido Demócrata que nos ha atacado y que políticamente todavía no hemos llegado a tal punto de luchar por nuestros intereses de clase, y lo que hace falta es una conciencia de clase. Por eso decimos concientización, conciencia de clase, conciencia de nuestra historia, organización política, acción revolucionaria para una liberación nacional por el socialismo. Es el planteamiento. Esa metodología que hemos lanzado como una bandera de lucha solo va a llegar cuando nos comprometemos, ahora sí, nos comprometemos a ese tipo de organización con esa visión, ¿verdad? Y pues todavía, y no necesariamente decimos que es Unión del Barrio, pues hay otras, ¿no? Ya Ernesto de Raza Unida, Movimiento de Liberación Nacional, Barrio Defense, pero hay otras que no están aquí, pero que hay que tal vez ampliar, ¿no? Hay que invitar para ir acumulando fuerza, en el sentido que vamos luchando, en el sentido que vamos creando una fuerza política para contrarrestar toda esta horrenda politiquería. Es una politiquería de basura que no nos orienta hacia la lucha de nuestros intereses, y eso es lo que tenemos que hacer. Y pues con eso sí quisiera agradecer a todos ustedes por participar. No sé si ya últimas palabras, porque yo sé que yo sí tengo otro compromiso ahorita a las 7:40, pero sí a ustedes.
Well, I want to thank you all. It was a wonderful discussion, and I hope that we continue with this kind of a discussion. We definitely need it, because right now the ideological struggle is the one that's so important right now, to think about who we are, where we're going, where we came from, and who is putting us down. We have to have that kind of a discussion. And so, thank you. I thank you so much. Tierra y libertad.
Tierra y libertad. Muchas gracias, compañeras, compañeros.
Trazo Kamati a todos, thank you very much, everybody who participated, who listened in as well. Stay in touch with the Barrio Defense Committee and Unión del Barrio as the organizers of this plática. We've kicked around the idea of organizing other pláticas, and so to be on our list, stay in touch, let us know that you found this interesting, share it with your compañeras and your compañeros, tell them to listen as well. Gracias again, Unión del Barrio, la Raza Unida Party. Gracias.
Muchas
adelante,
gracias.
Raza, adelante.
Venceremos.